All right. So, hello, everyone. Welcome to our session today over employee engagement. So, this is third time's a hopeful charm to be with me, right? Because we did performance management and we did coaching. And now we're going to talk about employee engagement. And as Crystal said in the chat, I did throw in something. This is in addition to the guide that she already gave you, the two guides she gave you. This is just for an activity we're going to do in session today. And I felt like it'd be helpful to have a copy of the Q12 questions. So, download that as well. And by the end of the session, and Crystal can help me to not forget, I'm also going to make sure that you have a copy of all of the upcoming training sessions for action planning. So you as supervisors, if and I know most everyone here is probably new to UNT supervision. And so you may not have had a chance in the past to review engagement scores previously, but if you've maybe moved into leadership or transitioned or something, it might be pretty familiar to you. And so we've got additional training, lots of options to go do your engagement action planning training that specifically gets more detail about how to do that process online and everything. Yes, thank you so much, Crystal. Okay. I don't really have to do introductions. Yay, because I know you all. And before I get started, I guess, does there anyone have any questions about anything we talked about last time or about what we're going to get into today before I get rolling? Good. Y'all can always give me the nods and the thumbs ups and things like that. I'm very visual and it's very helpful to me, even if you don't want to fiddle with unmuting yourself. The nods and stuff still help me too. And also, you can participate as much as possible in chat. I monitor it pretty well. And so I can use it as a quick way to just interact with you without you having to do that. But also feel free, you know me, I'm informal. You can unmute yourself at any time and jump in, grab my attention and add to the conversation as well. All right, so let's get into engagement. The idea of the objective today is we're going to talk about the concept of it. It is a concept because it's something that we're measuring that has to do with productivity, but really it's almost like, what are people's feelings of connectedness? And that's really, a feeling like other feelings that we have. So talking about what that looks like, talk about the instrument we use for measuring engagement. We've been using the Gallup tool for, I think, 6 or 7 years now. There's other tools out there that can do the same thing, but this is the mechanism we use, and we'll talk a little bit about the instrument, how to review and understand your results report, and look overall, just very high level about what's going on overall in our world or our enterprise across UNT system, and get into the action planning process. And again, if you leave here and you're like, wow, that was a lot, and I still kind of need a little more into the action planning, there is I think, at least 10 sessions out there that are coming up to help supervisors, because this is good timing for you to see this, because this is the same time that all of our population is being asked to do their annual engagement planning with their teams. So it's good time to hear this concept. And, I think it's really important to call out. I mean, most everything we talk about in the program that you're in has alignment with our values. When we talked about coaching, that's a lot about understanding we're better together to really help people to unbox themselves and move forward. I mean, I think when we talk about engagement, it connects very strongly to our values across our UNT, world that we have here. And it helps us to build connection, to care about individuals as individuals, to look at people beyond just who they are in the organization or their role. So my first question to you, and this might be a good one just to throw the first word you think of, okay? When you think of, oh, actually, no, I'll do it like this. I'm going to use a whiteboard space, and you're going to throw into the whiteboard space the answer to this question. What do you think of when you hear the concept of employee engagement? So just as before, you can use the annotate feature and you can use the text box with me. Draw anywhere here on the whiteboard. What do you think of when you hear the concept of employee engagement? Good, perfect. I already see. Oh, connection twice already. Yay. Must be something about that, huh? Great. And I'll keep monitoring and moving things around. What do you think of when you hear the term employee engagement? And while preference is you do it on the whiteboard, if you can't for some reason, you can always throw things in chat too. Good. So y'all can keep throwing things in as I talk, as always, but I'm going to read a couple things. So connection was like the first thing on people's minds. I guess y'all really felt that there. Emotionally committed, attention, awareness, talking and listening, enthusiasm, joining in. Yeah, not just being here, but joining in. That's a big difference. Invested, or active in the organization as opposed to being disengaged or I guess less active or contributing in the organization. Information sharing, responsible behavior, keeping people in the here mindset. Ooh, I'd love to hear more about what the here mindset means. Here mindset. Let's see, interested in learning through department programs. I'm seeing a couple things in chat. Ensuring communication between leaders and team is clear and consistent. Excitement about projects and tasks. Yeah, I mean, there is a lot connected to the concept of engagement that is very similar to what we traditionally think of with engagement. You know, you put a ring on it. I care very much so for this thing I'm doing. I am emotionally committed and I'm going to show that commitment, right? I'm engaged to be married to this commitment. There's a lot of similarities, right? It's a psychological commitment we have to someone or something within the organization. Thank y'all so much for sharing. Those are really great examples. Let me go ahead and clear the screen here. And we'll move on. Yes, so getting into the definition as it is formally, when Gallup defines it, it's about being involved in, committed to, or enthusiastic about their work. And what we find is really interesting about this concept of engagement is that one of the most important factors to helping to build engagement within groups, teams, individuals has to do with direct line supervisors. In fact, to the tune of about 70% of the variance you see. And so I always tell supervisors, it's a good responsibility, but remember, it's almost like this partnership, right? It has a lot to do with managers, it has a lot to do with supervisors, but people don't leave jobs, they leave supervisors, right? We get that there's a connection there, but the expectation is that you're here to create an environment ripe for the engagement. You can't be in charge of it. Just like I say motivation. So same thing. You are charged to create an environment where people are very motivated to do their work, but you can't make someone be motivated. I can't make someone be engaged, but I sure as heck can create an environment ripe for the engagement by making sure we're having interactive conversations. We're talking about development. We're talking about you as an individual and what's going on, in your sphere, right? All of this is important to creating an environment where engagement is bound to happen, right? So it's a big piece. Again, 70% of the factors and the variance that we see. I mean, think about yourself. What brought you to your career in higher ed? Why are you still involved in higher ed? What is your personal mission? So as I reflect on this, I guess you could throw something in the chat if you feel compelled, but what is it that keeps you here at UNT? What's something that really connects you here? You can throw it in the chat if you think about it. What makes you really excited to be here? What keeps you here? People you work with, feeling appreciated. Yep. Good so far, good so far. Again, you can unmute yourself and say it that way too if you prefer not to type. Feeling connected to the mission and impact. I consider higher education valuable. Yes, good. The work our program does, the culture in my division. Yeah, so far, and y'all can keep typing. Every single thing on this list connects in some way to one of the 12 questions, if not many of the 12 questions that are asked within the survey that we use. And I will say that engagement, by the way, as a concept is different than people being satisfied at work, which sounds a little surprising. I can be satisfied but not engaged, which is a weird thing to say, but I'll explain it in a minute here. It is not the same exact thing. So when we talk about being satisfied at work, it's almost like I am happy with being here. I am contributing, but it's not really this interactive relationship. I'm putting in rational commitment to my job. It's meeting basically my needs, right? That's why I'm here. I may or may not be the standard of productivity, but it's really kind of what I'm getting out of the relationship and what I am getting out of the experience. That oftentimes is what we classify as satisfaction. So that's not necessarily what happens in engagement, where there's a strong connection in this two-way relationship. Working with passion, oftentimes very high level performance. It's the organizations and culture where you feel like there's a lot of drive to moving the group forward, emotional commitment. People believe in value the work that they do. There's clear connections to the mission of what they're doing, right? All of this is a little bit different than just being satisfied. Does that make sense? Does everyone see the differences between the two, right? You could probably think of, you don't have to raise your hand, but think of jobs where you just felt the satisfaction, but not the engagement. It was definitely that one way approach to it. And what we see too in using our survey tool, the way that Gallup specifically too defines it is that there's 3 types or levels of engagement we see within organizations. And by the way, when we take the survey and we look at the results, you're never going to see exactly who in your department is any of these levels. But what we know is, and I'll get into this in a little bit, is that there is trends that we see in the American workforce, and then there's results we see at UNT, because we've had more than 100 respondents to the survey, where we can kind of see what percentage we have of our population are of each. Okay. So by definition, the engaged we already talked about, right? The psychological, emotional commitment, more likely to stay. The not engaged are kind of the, I don't want to say swing voters, maybe the wait and see kind of folks. It's kind of the probably are satisfied, but are not yet emotionally committed. So productive, but I'm probably more likely to leave, more likely to miss, or to not really see the connection in the role as strongly as someone who might be engaged. And a lot of our workforce in the American workforce tends to sit here. I'm going to give you the real information, the real data point in a minute, but it's always been, I think, somewhere between like 40 and 50. Almost half of the American workforce tends to be in the not engaged spot when they're in their organization. And then finally, actively disengaged. I'm almost like there physically, but I'm psychologically absent and I'm unhappy. And not only am I unhappy, I'm so unhappy that I need to make sure everyone knows how unhappy I am and ruin any of the good things we're doing. In fact, we're going to try to move it all backwards, right? We're going to try to take away from all of the good. You can see here it says sabotage your ship, because specifically, we like to use the analogy a lot of times of it being like us all together in a small like 10-person rowing team. And you can imagine it doesn't take much for the organization to get off track if people are trying to row us in the opposite direction, right? So all of that impacts us very specifically, and so we always want to be mindful. And as supervisors, I'll say as an awareness, a lot of times actively disengaged are not going to be able to pull themselves to engagement or not engaged. These are probably people who strategically are not in the right place in the organization or not in the right organization at all. We spend a lot more time talking about getting not engaged people engaged. But it's also not something to call out someone and be like, well, you're actively disengaged, so I'm going to fire you. That's not the point. It's more about understanding that they're, just like I said before, the motivation, there's only so much you can cultivate, right? To be able to help people to feel that growth and engagement. So I keep referring to Gallup because that's the vendor we've used for some time. And again, there's many other platforms out there. You can feel free to look at them, but I'm going to talk to that particular tool in it. And I guess I could get a feel real quick here. Can y'all use your thumbs up or your green button in the participant, where you can interact with me to let me know? My question is, how many of you got to take the survey this past go round? Give me a thumbs up if yes, and maybe like a or a no, so I can kind of get a sense. Okay, it looks like most people so far I'm seeing did. Okay, cool. Thank y'all. So you are familiar with this, because not only do we look at this as supervisors, and if you had 4 respondents in your area take it, you would have had a report, excuse me, for you as a supervisor. But you also take the survey as a member of our organization too. So you also get to contribute by responding. And in it, they ask these Q12 questions, which again is also in the little handy handout I gave you, if you prefer to see it there, or if you want to print it off or put it on your desktop. Well, the things we're asked here, I'm going to get into this in a minute, into a hierarchy. But basically, it's going through things like not only what's expected of me at work, but do I have materials to do my work? Do I get to do what I do best every day, which is a strengths-based question. So if anyone's ever familiar about how important it is to lean into your strengths or Clifton strengths or you name it, that's really what the question's asking here. I feel like I can contribute those. A question about feeling recognition, someone caring about you in the organization, encouraging your development, getting to learn and grow, getting to be talked to about your progress. This best friend at work question, which I'll get into in a minute. I know a lot of people love to hate this one, so we'll get into what the heck that might look like or mean for us as supervisors. My associates or fellow employees are committed to doing quality work. Someone said here how important the mission is to them. So part of engagement comes from feeling like the mission or purpose makes you feel like your job is important, that you contribute, that you matter. At work, my opinions seem to count. So those are the questions we asked. And what will happen is that people will respond on a 5-point scale. So as you as supervisors go and look at your reports, you'll see variations and frequencies between these numbers. If you've had at least 10 people, you get to see the breakdown of every single question in this, okay? And they respond if they strongly agree or strongly disagree with all 12 of those statements. And just some insight, if this especially is your first year too, that's the standard Gallup uses for their Q12, no matter where you go. They allow organizations to add on additional questions if they'd like, that tend to be over. I think we pick normally things about wellness, or being supported, or there's additional questions we can add that are not part of the Q12. So you might have remembered being asked those as well. And they, I think, still had that 1 to 5 scale. But point being, what happens when they get the scale, and as you're analyzing the information as a supervisor, what you can know is everything people tend to look through in this data has to do with that almost visceral, very, that gut reaction people have. So when you look at a 5, that's a very strong way of saying yes, right? I agree. This is true. That 5, I mean, that's the highest. You think about evaluations, I have people that have always been like, I'm never going to give a 5 because that's perfect. So that is a strong reaction, right? It's a strong yes. The 4 then is something that is what we consider the yes, but. So it's kind of there, however. There's a little however at the end of it. When people answer 3, do you know what that is? It's a nice way of saying no. It's not really where we want it to be. A 2 is a no, and a 1 is a strong no. So this, again, oftentimes is a very strong reaction. I'm using this survey as an opportunity to give that very strong disagreement, right? So, like I mentioned, this is all part of a hierarchy. According to the Gallup's particular tool, you have to think of it as building upon itself. So, if you look at the questions, it kind of makes sense. It's almost like Maslow's here. Q1, and I'm gonna take a minute here. I know that this content is very heavy on me talking today because I'm trying to explain the tool and the concept. So it's a little different than the other sessions where I'm turning the screen a lot to you. So again, feel free to jump in and interrupt me at any time. I don't want to lose anybody. I just know there's a lot of content, so I'm just kind of dredging through and making sure I'm covering it all. So please interrupt me, okay? But again, it's kind of like this, almost like Maslow's hierarchy of things, and it kind of builds. So knowing what is expected of me at work is a very baseline question. And in fact, so much so that if I don't know that, then it's hard to reach the other questions as you go up. The example I always like to use is my coworkers are committed to quality work. It's kind of hard to know that if you don't know what's expected of you. So you can see how these kind of build. Opportunities to learn and grow, right? Growth and actualization is really high up on the top. Basic needs are basically what I get, right? I got the materials, I know what's expected. The individual contributions is the giving part. So again, putting my strengths forward, getting the recognition. They care at me about at work, right? The belonging, teamwork questions then come up. My opinions seem to count. I'm contributing. I'm part of the mission. The quality work. I have connection at work. And then finally, the opportunities to learn and grow. So what Gallup will say is at the bottom 6. So if you as a supervisor are looking at your report and you're trying to figure out as you talk to your team what's important for you to review and to focus on, they're going to say start with your, if at all possible, look at the base of your hierarchy because that's weighted more essentially. That's going to be crucial, and it builds upon itself. And you'll see too, I mean, let's be honest, nothing in life ever fits into 12 boxes all cleanly. There's some connection between some of the questions. But whenever we look at intentional language into what the question's getting at, I want to call out some really interesting things here before I get into the best friend. One of the questions, the recognition question, says something along the lines of, I've received some kind of recognition in the last 7 days, right? So my question to you is, do you think that they actually care that it's every exact 7 days you check it off the box? You think that's the intention of the question? I'm seeing no. What are they trying to get at when they say this, when they say last 7 days? What is the point that they're trying to make?
Do you remember being praised recently? Not necessarily specifically in that time frame.
Absolutely. Thank you, Scott. So yeah,
And
everyone, go ahead.
I'm sorry. Um, um, I think it's important. It's not every 7 days. It's just that it's said and how it's said and how it's delivered.
Yes, absolutely. You can see a lot of people are saying it's recent, it's consistent. It's not exactly 7. I ask it 7 because it gets a good frame of reference, but what they're trying to get at, are you consistently being recognized, right? And so that's kind of the terminology term, what they call intentional language to help with the response. Same thing here. Okay. Question 10. I have a best friend at work, right? Anyone have strong feelings about this question? No shame. Just curious. Is this anyone's first time? Matthew raised his hand. Anyone anyone want to share their feelings about it or why they think it's odd? It's fine. Safe space. I'm just curious. Matthew, did you want to add something?
I do.
Okay, go ahead, Shelly.
I've never really liked that question because yeah, I have friends at work,
Mm-hmm.
but I wouldn't necessarily say they're my best friends. So, I have work acquaintances and everything, but I'm not going to go hang out with them over the weekend, or whatever.
Right. Yep. I like
So,
Matthew said, I can't bring my dog to work.
yeah, right. I always thought that question should be rephrased to just,
Okay.
do
Yep.
you have friends at work? Not best friends, just friends.
Good. Yes. Okay. And I'm going to see Monique said, I had memories of being within an org in which management's role, okay, where we always went over this question because the organization always dipped at this question because of how it's phrased and interpreted. Yes. Thank you. Okay. Good. Any other thoughts? That it? Okay. So what is going on here? It's very similar to what is going on with the last 7 days question. So to give you a little bit of background into it, many people have complained to Gallup about this question, and over time they've consistently said we're not getting rid of it. Some organizations even won't go with the platform because of this question, and Gallup's like, that's fine, move along, because they know it's measuring what they're trying to measure. So what happens with the best friend question, and a lot of this you'll find, and what my point being throughout a lot of our dialogue today is most everything that comes out of knowing what to do as a supervisor based on your results on this survey has to do with the conversation that comes along with it. But the point of when you look at that question, when they use the word best, it really does a specific thing. It ties to productive work teams, which is really the concept of engagement. We call it engagement now, but when George Gallup was looking at and investigating this idea back in the 30s, we didn't call it engagement. But we knew that these strong, productive work teams had these qualities that you see in the list of the questions here. So when they tried it with the wording friend or someone I can trust or a confidant at work, they tried the question other ways. It no longer measured what it was intentionally trying to measure, which was the strong, productive work teams, which was the component of engagement it was trying to measure. So using the other words meant it wasn't measuring appropriately anymore. So it was an invalid question. So it's, again, very intentional language to try to drive something out of the person in their response. An example, oh gosh, I can't remember. I think it's from the book 12, which is a management book over these questions. And they talked about an example where they found that this question was rated very highly was in a group that they were studying that was a bunch of line workers. And when they came and talked to them about it, they said a lot of what they were talking towards was this high level of trust they have with each other, because it's not just work for them, it's each other's lives. So if they're not suited up and doing things in a safe manner, then they have to, I don't want to be the one to call your wife and say something's happened to you. So they have this strong level of trust in their groups, which connected to this question quite strongly, and therefore there was some kind of connection there. So we know it basically measures a lot of trust and connection in a way that asking questions about trust does not get us to, but this kind of terminology does. So that was probably way more insight than y'all wanted to know, but I think it's fascinating to see what the intention is with the questions to try to get responses that help you as supervisors have good information to have dialogue. And again, that's the point, because what I would do with my team is I'd do what I just did with you, and I'd say, how do y'all feel about this question? And you could say, based on, maybe they gave it a 4.5 or whatever, and you say, this is pretty high or this is pretty low. What do y'all feel like when you see that question? What does it mean to you? Do you think it's important to our team? Is it not important to our team? And that right there is the point, is you have discussion about what the meaning is for them and what kind of came into their head and what they'd like to see about that or not about that question to help to grow engagement. So again, you can see these things are supposed to spur dialogue. Again, makes sense, everyone? All right. So this is my little chance here. I will not spend decades in this area, in this realm. Like I said, you have so many other trainings that you can take. I'm not going to spend all of my time in this, but I want to make sure y'all are familiar with how to go and navigate the Gallup site to look at these reports, okay? So I'm going to click you to a direct link. When you get a copy of the slide deck, it's in there as well. If you're a lazy bones girl like me, then what you'll often do is you'll just Google UNT ODE. That's my team, UNT ODE. And you'll find our website that has all this information, okay? But I'm going to click here, and I believe I might have to change my share screen. So give me a second here, y'all, while I do that. All right. Cool. Okay. So can everyone now see my dashboard for the Gallup site? Great. Okay. Again, this is once I log in, this is what you will see. When you go in and you log in, you'll see menu right here. You may or may not need to ignore, because a lot of times people will get this right here where it prompts you with the report. Remember, we're using the same report as Dallas and System and HSC, so we are going to see each other's. So the one that comes up at the top may not be UNT's. It might be whatever was closed the latest, or you name it. So if you don't see UNT's on here, so like mine's defaulted to System, go up here to the menu and pick which report you're looking for, okay? So it's not like you're on the wrong thing. It's just that you got to click reports. And as a supervisor, you go in, you log in, you click reports, and then you can find, again, not only the results from this past cycle, but all the other cycles. So we find then our UNT one. And it's easy to find when you see how many we have. So there's UNT. And then it's going to load my data. So I just want to show you how to access your scorecard, your snapshot, your recommendations on what to do in response, and then your all questions dashboard. Okay, so by default, it's going to take me to everything. So basically, if I looked up the president's level, this is the same thing. This is anything that funnels under the president. I want to go look at a particular team. Gosh, who would I use? I'm just like, I don't know. I guess I'll use with. I'm just randomly selecting this in the moment. Okay, so then I can see the roll up, right? And you can see the report for this particular person. You can see it for anyone. So you want to just look by your last name and find your last name and find the report corresponding with that. So again, you can see anybody, so it's not that difficult. You just find your name. And you can also slice and dice. It almost is like scary how much you can slice and dice your information. But I say 9 times out of 10, the most valid way for you to look at your information, to have discussions with your team, is just to look at it by your name under teams. Okay. The reason is, like, if you look at it by department name or manager or role type, what's going to happen is it'll often include you too. So it'll change the information on the report just a little bit. So the purest one for you to see anyone below you is to just do it by your last name. Does that make sense? Cool.
I have
Now,
a quick question about
yes,
that.
jump in.
So I've got my report over on my other screen.
Mm-hmm.
What if my team is so small that it won't show results?
Then what you can do is you can still have a conversation with your team, but you just basically use like that sheet I gave you with the 10 on it. That's an example of what you could use. Or, the roll up. So whoever's above you, if they have a report, you could use that, because I'm going to make an example here. So like, say there's 10 people on a team. Okay. 3 of them are yours, right? and then you roll up and that's why there's 10 in the department overall. Okay, let's just say that. So you're not going to see the 3 because you have to have at least 4 people to get a report, and that's for confidentiality because it would be pretty easy for me to see who said what if it got smaller, right? But those 3 will be included in the 10-person report that's your supervisors, right? So I say that might be a good tool. It will include others that aren't within your little unit of 3, but it would include those 3 in the response. So it's a good way to springboard to the dialogue. So if you have that option, I would do the roll up. But again, you can still do, say there's transition in a team, there's a whole new dynamic, there's been a reorg. You might say, a blank one actually makes sense because where we're at and a lot of new people or whatever, then you can use that too. The whole point is to have the conversation around it. Yeah. Okay, good. Good question.
Sorry, I'm also following along and it's not letting me search anything. Is that because it's so small?
You won't even let you go in here?
No, I can't even type anything. Like it's not letting me do anything.
Oh, I'm so glad you said that. Here's what's probably happened. The little button that says to accept all the cookies is so small and hard to see. So is that it?
I see it.
So I've had lots of people call me about that, by the way. It is a very little sneaky thing there. So yeah, once you accept that, then you'll be able to click and find. I'm glad you mentioned.
Worked.
Thank you, Sammy.
Thank you.
Okay. You're not alone. One thing I'll mention here is as you're looking at the report, you see there's this direct button and the roll up button. This example makes a lot of sense here with Dr. Withs, right? So you can see, she's the VP of Student Services. So she's got a lot of people underneath her that would roll up, but right now the report is just showing 11. This is because this is showing her direct 11 reports, their result, right? So this is her direct reports only. If I click roll up, then that'll take everything and go all the way down. So now my respondents are 380. So this is the entirety of her division right here. So if I was a supervisor within her team, I could see this, but for my conversation, I would want to find the one that I can that's the closest to my level. So either me or one above, or that blank one if you need to. Cool. This also trips people up. I forget sometimes I'll look, I'm like, that's not enough people. There's more there. So she can have conversations with her team with the first report. And then this is good for her just to know what's going on divisionally as well. Cool. I'll go back to direct. So again, she's say hypothetically having a conversation with her team. She can see the trends from over time. She can see where she is in the ranking. So again, we're always being connected to the organizational, higher educational database. So others that would fall into that are also higher ed. So we're not just in the same, what's the word? So small schools are still here too. Okay, this is where they would reside. So small schools, private schools, anything that's higher ed would be in here. Every question you see and percentile rank is not us against each other. It's us against the database of all these other institutions. So where do we fall, right? And so you can see this right here is the AI generated response to what the highest items were for you and what the lowest items were for you. It is based on their little algorithm because they're going to preference, remember always the bottom 6 questions because that they find is more important. And then they'll look, okay, so based on how's the bottom of your hierarchy first? Let's look at that. Okay, how is that doing? If it's doing pretty well, then we'll look at everything else. So for Dr. With and her direct team, the highest ones are their best friend and development. Some of the lower ones, even though they're still strong, are having materials and equipment to do their job right and the opportunity to do best. So traditionally, you might say you want to pick 1 or 2 questions to focus in on to help you to grow. It's nice to sometimes also pick things that we're strong in because when you've already got some proficiency, it's easy to make strides forward and higher. But I also definitely want to emphasize, especially if you got a lot of red zone items or questions, this is definitely something that, just like anything else, it's calling my attention to say, I need to be mindful of this. So it helps you to engage in dialogue with your team to kind of have the visual. And so I like the red, excuse me, be able to see the red and yellow and green. You can see right here, actually, it shows me where the red would stop, where the yellow is. You can kind of see. The darker the green, the leafier the green, it's better for you, right? So that means good, and red light means stop or be aware. And again, it's a mechanism to help you to understand or to drive your dialogue. So again, this doesn't mean this is what you're required to focus on as a supervisor. You might decide in talking with each other that this isn't a particular value or something else is more important. In fact, one team I was working with one time, they had a really low score in best friend at work, but partly because of the reasons we talked about, like it didn't speak to them. And in meeting with the team, you know, traditionally that would probably be your focus. It's like the one red thing. You're like, oh, we got to do something about it. But after we talked as a team, they're like, truly, this isn't meaningful to us. We don't care about it. It'll probably always stay the same. It's kind of our industry thing. And so it's not a big deal. We'd rather spend our time and actions on things that are more important to us. So even though it was red, they went with other questions to really strategize around. That's fair and valid because that's what makes sense to that team. It's all about growing engagement. So that really should be the focus. All that to say, this is what, again, they're going to automate to say, here's the suggestions on the things that you probably want to look at. And you can even hit this get advice button. Hopefully I don't mess anything up by doing that. And the get advice button can give you additional support. Yes, I know. You know, it always knows it's being watched, doesn't it? Okay, so on that particular question, I can get additional support for it. They give you some ideas on action items, things that can help. You know, there's also all sorts of tools that you can use that they're going to generate for you based on your interest in, you know, of that question. Make sense? So you can get advice. You can also use it as your springboard to go ahead and create the action plan. So I encourage every single supervisor create the action plan in the system. This has been a big move overall within our enterprise for organizations to create action plans each year in the system. Easier for us to track, easier for us to see within your teams. So like say your VP can see everything that's going on in their division for plans. And that's helpful to move things strategically forward, you know, and it's also helpful for you to see the things going on with your area. So it, you know, this is a mechanism for you to actually enter in your action plan as well as read your report. In fact, I just might as well do it now. So say I want to focus in on some materials and equipment part. If I click the action plan button, it immediately populates something for me to add in, you know, related items I want support on. So this just right here, this is just resources. So Gallup's saying, go ahead and put your plan name in. And if you pick some of this stuff, like for my low one, and you click it, I'm going to give you some resources specific to that too. Okay, that's all that is. I'd put a goal in here, a due date, a description, and this will help you then to create that plan for your people to see that plan, for it to be memorialized, trackable, something you can go back to, where it's very helpful year to year. And very relatively easy. And in a minute, you'll see there's only like 4 or 5 boxes. I'm not going to create one right now. I'm sure Dr. With is like, don't create a plan for me. But you can go in and you can specify all of these details. And so sometimes what, you know, depending on how you and your team work, it might make sense for y'all to be in a space where you've got the computer and you're doing it together in real time. It might make sense for you just to write out some notes and then come do this by yourself later. That's fine too. Okay, so let's see, AI recommendations and the all questions dashboard. Let's see. Okay, so right now this is the snapshot, right? This is the front snapshot. What you can also do up here is to export a report. And in that, I'll give you multiple options or single reports. And in this, I like to see my all questions PDF. All right. And then if I look at my past reports, should be like that next one. So this is probably the best thing that supervisors can use in order to have the conversation. In particular, this second page here. This second page here is where you can see all the questions at once. So like if it was me, I'd meet with my team and I would have this piece out and we would talk through the questions together because you can easily see, right? This is a high movement change, right? This is something that really grew for us. I can see immediately if I had a lot more ones in this, right? Okay, so what does that mean to me if I feel like my opinions don't seem to count? A lot of people strongly said no to that. Maybe we should talk about that. The current top box tells you the percentage of people that gave that particular question a 5. So right here, I mean, I got 91% of the people that responded gave that a 5. I mean, you can see it aligns right here, right? So I mean, that also is important. Like, how many people are feeling that strong yes about this question? So I would print this out. I would talk to my team with it, dialogue with it, decide some questions that we want to get into the weeds about, and some actions that we'd like to take to make it better. With a question like, I'm making just examples real quick. So like, if your people were really low on this and don't really feel like they know what's expected of work, I've seen some people say, okay, well, maybe we should reevaluate and look over our job descriptions, make sure everything's updated, make sure we spend our next performance check-in talking about your job description, something like that. Very intentional to help us to make sure we know expectations. That might be an action item to help us with this question. Okay, taking a breather. How are we doing? How does this feel? Does this all make sense? Awesome, awesome, awesome sauce. Okay, so I think that's probably good enough for right
Can
now.
I ask a question?
Of course you can.
Okay, so one thing that based on my experience I see in engagement is the risk of engagement. Okay, let me give you a real example. Imagine one advisor has, 3, 4 student worker and also, or maybe PhD student. Imagine one of them asks you, okay, can you pick up me from a stadium? I don't have money, or I forgot my phone, I can't use Uber. And you go and pick up him or her, your team members, and suddenly somebody hit your car, right? And you lost your car. What would be, who is responsible for this engagement? This is real case study that I am telling.
So who's responsible for this
And then
engagement?
imagine that your car fully, you should forget about it.
So I'm going to say back your question to make sure I'm understanding correctly. You're saying in this instance where there's almost like this over attempt to connect with an employee, then
So
it's
imagine
becomes,
you handle 4 or 5 PhD students, and one of these students one day they ask that, oh, I am in stadium, I need ride, it is too
right.
Late, and you go and give ride, and suddenly an accident happened.
Yeah, it sounds more like a discussion about risk or responsibility, probably not the
Yes,
concept
I'm
of
telling you
engagement.
that engagement risk. So all these engagement, I think some of them maybe has some kind of risk. So
Okay. So
have you think about this?
no, I never thought about that example. It's a very interesting one. But I mean, in general, what I see with most of the times with teams, what we're talking about tends to be the things that have to do with the role responsibilities in the organization or how they feel connected to other teammates in the organization. How I feel like if there's a change in the organization or a project or something, am I in on it? Do I know the feedback? It's more about the daily operations on the team that tend to be the things I hear reported back. And so that's, I think, mostly, and again, when we're talking about this psychological commitment to the organization, so it's probably a little different than, the very interesting thing I think you're studying right now, but yeah, fascinating thing that you're working on right now.
We can talk about it later, but I
Okay.
just wanted to bring that some of
Yeah.
the engagement has risk that, if I decline to go give a ride, then they think, oh, why? Because we have a every week meeting and we know each other, then it should not be a problem to give a ride from, parking lot 80 to BLB, just 1 minute. But something happened. So then who is responsible?
Interesting.
That
Yeah.
student will not pay you anything for your car, but you should pay all the expenses. So I just wanted to bring the risk of engagement sometimes is very important.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's overall risk assessment in general too, because that happens with, like, for example, I'm going to switch my share back because I'm on the wrong screen now. But, there's certain risk factors that go into how we do sporting events and things too. There's all sorts of risk factors with things that have to do with, what is it called? Workers' compensation and things. So yeah, the risk assessment versus the conversation about how to engage with your workforce. I'm interested to see the results of the study, I guess I should say. Okay, so anyways, let's talk about what's going on within our organization here at UNT and what's going on across our American workforce. So based on our data at UNT, this is where we're at right now. So again, based on their particular proprietary information, it looks like about 46% of our population, and we grew this year, by the way, we increased our engagement, which is just wonderful news. 46% of our population is what is that qualifier of engagement, which is by the definition we said, right? The highly productive work teams that have that psychological commitment to the organization. So that's that basic definition. Then the actively disengaged are 14%. And then again, midpoint here, 40%. So again, if we look at what's going on in the USA, I had to do aggregate information from what Gallup has out there based on the past few years, but we're doing a lot better there here than overall the American workforce, where I said, again, about half of us tend to be not engaged. To go back to my rowboat example, I guess I could say, if I was UNT then, and I've got my 10-person rowboat team, that means that 5 of us are in there. I'm just going to round, rowing us forward, moving us forward, driving our organization forward, our strategy forward, you name it. That would mean then that we got 4 people in the boat who are just probably like sitting there with their paddles, kind of like along for the ride, not going to really do anything either way, but I'm here. And then that one person is in that 10-person rowing team actively rowing us backwards, right? Or in any different, I don't know if you've been in a boat ever with someone rowing, but it does not take much for you to get off course, that even on a 10-person team, that one person can make a huge impact. So that's the percentage we have of disengaged, right? So we're doing better than the American workforce overall. But if we look at what's going on in the organization, that's that one person on the 10-person team really pulling us back, while 5 of us are actively pulling us forward. When we also look at what is considered world-class, you might hear a lot of times us within the UNT enterprise talk about trying to be a best place to work. They consider that for world-class, if you have for every 8 engaged employees for 1 actively disengaged. For UNT this year, we basically have, and this is better than last year because we didn't even have 3. We have a little over 3. 3 1/3, I guess, of us that for every 3 people we have, they're engaged, just 1 disengaged. Okay, so percentage wise that you can see it. Now look at us overall through our time. So this is all the organizations. Again, this is kind of just the big picture, bird eye view of it, but you can see what's happened across our time and our results. So overall, all of our institutions have grown. What you do see as a pattern overall is that once you start talking about engagement and measuring it, you do see an uptick, but we've had some growth, a little bit of a pullback after COVID, and then we're starting to grow again. Again, we've had an increase from last year 3.84 to now 3.92. That is a very significant growth, to be honest with you. I'm a little surprised we had such great growth, but also not surprised by some of the things I've seen that we've taken in action to respond organizationally. I know for the president, I mean, this has been just on heart and mind. That coupled with the, what was the name of that survey we did? The employee experience survey, where we got a lot of feedback about people wanting more remote options, wanting more supervisor training, wanting more to move forward with compensation and things like that, that have really driven a lot of the response we have. So our results in engagement does the same thing, right? This helps us to move ourselves forward strategically and really help to listen to our people and what their needs are to move us forward. All right, so like I said, we're close to like where I think we should take a break. Yeah, I think we're about to take a break. Yeah, we're about to get into the action plan in a little more in depth and how to have the conversation. But I love this little quote that I'll leave you with as I let you take that break, is that the Q12 questions, again, are not intended, they are intended to promote the dialogue, not to replace it. You don't use it as your answer to solve a problem. I've had people and not naming names, but in high leadership positions too, they'll take the report and think, oh, okay, I see where we're going down and I've got an answer to that and I'm going to implement it, and it's expensive and it'll take a lot of work and a lot of effort. And I'll say, whoa, pump the brakes. A lot of times what is needed is not this vast, huge new system in place. It needs to, and it shouldn't be action that happens before you talk to people. That's why it's so important to understand that this is your dialogue mover, not to replace it. You don't take action because you looked at your report. You take action because you take your report to your people and you talk about it. Does that make sense? So I think it's a good place for me to stop. When we come back after our break, we will talk a lot more into the action planning discussion and how the steps to that. Let's see, I'll give you 5 minutes. That is, oh, it just switched. You're so lucky. What is that then? 4, 5, 6, 7, 7, right? Okay, come back at 3:57. 57. See y'all in 5. Okay, so let's get into these conversations to action plan to help to build engagement and to drive it forward. If we think about the outcomes we're looking to really improve on our team, remember what I said before, the concept of it is connected to strong, productive work teams, right? If we want to see better service by our people, we know an engaged workforce can increase service, or at least the perception of service 1.5 times if we have an engaged workforce versus a disengaged workforce. For retention, we know that it can impact 21% higher for engaged workforce than non-engaged engaged workforce. Increases of productivity about 17%. These are a lot of stats based on Gallup's research over time with organizations that have highly engaged workforces versus not. So this we know is a way to pathway ourselves to help us to drive to some of the outcomes we're looking for as supervisors. So in the big picture, again, it starts with a survey, but that just helps us to source out things. From the sourcing and from the evaluation, we make the plan to then hopefully get us to an engaged workforce for a thriving campus culture for our employees or students, a place you get excited to go to work to every day. I'll say the structure is important because I always said it's like kind of like when you go to the doctor and you get like blood work done, let's say, maybe you're getting some testing done. What will happen is traditionally, blood pressure. Okay, I'm getting my blood pressure measured, and okay, that's great. That's like doing the survey, right? I'm doing the actual measurement. I now can look at the measurement and say, oh, my blood pressure's high. Okay, I get my results in my survey for engagement. Okay, it's high, it's low. And then what does the doctor come in and say? Well, they're very unhelpful. They just tell you to, eat right and exercise, of course. Ugh, I'm not going to do that. No, I'm joking. But that's the thing, right? That's then the action that we say is important based on that result. We say, okay, well, this is the stuff I think that'll help us to get there. But just doing that, just talking about a plan and just taking the assessment does you no good until you then implement it. You go back to it. You see how it's working. Is the, 3 months I come back, do I see that my, blood pressure go down? I'm trying the Mediterranean diet now. Okay, let's see what results you get. So it's all interactive, it's continuous, and it's based on really using the results to help us to move forward via the action. And Gallup is going to define it as this process of taking steps to improve our engagement based on the results. Very simple form, and it's in page 8 on your participant guide for today. But if I'm going to be an honest gal, I actually like the process map better in the long form of your toolkit that I also gave you. Hang on a minute. You can see a very similar planning process, but the steps are what we take to really kind of get that dynamic going after we have the results. So I'll talk through each of the steps to prepare you well. And again, if you even leave here and you're like, that wasn't enough, you can go take one of those other sessions we have on the process. But the first thing you want to do is prepare. So if you're getting ready to have an action planning discussion with your team, first you need to go and review what's out there, right? Now, I always say, prepare without planning your next step. You want to take it, you want to evaluate it. You want to see what went down. You want to see anything that calls out to you, what you think might be going on, but not making complete determinations of it, right? You look at your foundational needs. Is a lot of what's going on having to do with the first 6 questions? I prepare myself mentally. Like, I need to get ready to go into a meeting to talk about what our action should be and make sure I'm not being defensive about it. And I use this example every time I do this session because he tells me it's fine to do it. But a really great example was one of my past supervisor who's still here with the organization. He said one of the first times that he was new to UNT and he had us do it. When we sat down to review our results, he was very defensive. Specifically, we had a low response on having the equipment and materials to do our job right. And he's like, what are you talking about? I always give y'all whatever thing I can't remember a time I declined something you requested, And when we were talking, first of all, he realized, like, in retrospect, he's like, mentally, I was not where I should have been. None of my responses should have been, but we blank, or yes, we have. It's not the time for that. It's time to listen and reflect and hear, right? And what was really fascinating about that is, in talking through the questions, the materials and the equipment to do our job right, once we had the discussion, a lot of us were really talking about personnel. When we took the survey, our minds were like, there's just not enough of us to do what we need to do. So that felt like the response that came to our minds. And you would have never known that without talking about it, right? It wasn't just about an office chair or having the program on your computer. It was a lot more than that, but that didn't come out till we talked. And so you just got to mentally get ready. Am I ready for what I might hear, even if it's something I don't want to hear or I disagree with? Getting yourself open mentally. That's another way to prepare. Looking for patterns, but not assuming what they mean. Looking at what it could be possibly, printing out the blank sheets, whatever it needs to do to get ready to prepare for that session. Again, a one-pager, like I showed you before, is a really great, easy snapshot in time. And that's one thing I would communicate to my teams. Whatever y'all talk through is a snapshot in time. It's based on what we were feeling and thinking in the moment that we took it in, October, right? So say your team went through a reorg after that, or say you lost half your people after that. I'm just making up stuff. When you go to sit with your team about your results, you remember that was a snapshot in time with maybe people that are gone or a department that's not really there anymore. You use that to help to cultivate your conversation, right? Because again, it's just that snapshot. Remember, you have to have at least 4 people to get the report. You have to have at least 10 people to see the distribution of the responses on the questions. You have to have at least 30 people respond to be able to see the green, the amount of engaged within your group, and 100 to see all 3. These are levels of protection that Gallup has on the information. So, like, again, divisions are probably going to be able to see all 3, but your team of 4 or 5 is not going to be able to see all 3, right? And so to keep the confidentiality, make people feel comfortable to want to take it each year, because there is literally no way that we can see the information of the data. Sometimes we actually have to go to the consultants to do certain reports because they protect that so that we don't ever see identifying information on who is surveyed. Other things to note, I will say here too, you're going to notice that you'll see an arrow associated with any kind of, what is that, 0.2% of change? I might be saying that wrong, but a statistically significant change would be that 1/10 of a point. So that's also something that Gallup would say is significant as well. I think we mostly went over everything else because we already talked about the top box. One thing I will tell you is people get the option to respond to any and all questions. So you'll notice, it probably is true on this one, people will drop off. So like everyone took this question, or everyone but one. Everyone took these questions, but then people dropped off. They didn't want to answer the best friend at work. They skipped it. Now that's fine. I mean, what you want to do as a supervisor, encourage people to take the survey, but don't demand like you have to take the survey, that you're never going to get any accurate information. And the same thing to say, I want you to all take every single question. But I will tell you, say you had a group of 4, and so you're going to get a report, but one person on that team didn't answer one of those questions, you're not, because you're not at least on that line, because you have to have that minimum to get the response of that question to you. Does that make sense? So just bear that in mind. You're going to lose some data if people didn't answer the minimum on that particular question. Okay. So then you're preparing, you're scheduling the meeting with your team, looking at the availability of people, always plan a little more time than you think you might need. Think about the urgency. I mean, like, again, I want to have a quick turnaround. I mean, right now, a lot of people are actively trying to get in their information and be encouraged to do it by the end of January, right? We want to try to get, and some institutions are requiring everyone. So it's like really a strong push right now for us to do this. But, it's nothing that I want to wait around on, especially if I get results that are tragic in some way. I'm so sorry, guys. It's not a mechanism to slap your wrist. It's a development tool. And that's how we've been using it. The whole time I've been here, it's been developmental purposed. So that means that we're using it to help to grow and to be better. And that should be the focus. So you want to get it scheduled. Know it's an urgent thing to do. Think about the complexity of the issues. Make sure you remind people, give them a copy and say, look at it in advance. Think about what you feel about this in advance, what you'd like to see different. Well, when maybe a good question I like to ask is, What would it take for you to want to rate this a 5 next year? What would that be? Get people primed for when they come in and have a conversation with you. Does Gallup draw any inferences from the percent of the team that doesn't participate in the survey at all? No. See, they're going to have to collect enough to be able to do anything. So the absence of something, they wouldn't give us information at all, if that answers your question. Okay. When it comes to people, feelings are facts. So this is what I was getting at earlier. Doesn't matter if we think it's right or wrong. The responses that we're going to get back is not up for debate. It's their truth, and that's it, right? So even if you disagree with the truth, know that that's their feeling, and that is going to come out as fact in the way they respond to your survey. So I've always said, and this is true because I know it's a good developmental tool for us, you'd rather have everyone on your team respond and get a tick down than to have very few people respond and get a great score on your engagement. Because then you're not really seeing the full picture, and there's not as much, it's not much ease to make actionable movement on it, right? Next step is to identify. So you're getting ready for the conversation, you're meeting with your teams. Again, you want to make sure that you talk about the meaning behind the questions, right? So was it that the materials question for them was about personnel? Was it about programs? What was it about? What did it mean for them? Did they want the fancy new office chair? What does the thing have to do with in regards to the question, right? Then you want to think about with your teams, what are 1 to 3 of the lower scoring items that we can really prioritize? The things that we can help ourselves to develop in and to move forward with. What are those, and I say items, but a lot of times people associate with questions. So like maybe I want to focus on Q1 and Q2, the foundational things this year. And then we'll talk about the actions to get there. So what is our priorities? What are the things we really want to look at? And how do we be strategic about it? So if you've got big groups, I don't know how big y'all's teams are, but I'm hoping you don't have groups of 30, but and those groups, it's harder for us to come to determination on what's the best focus. So sometimes I've met with teams and we've done basically a polling system, like pick your top 3, we vote on it, then we see what the top 2 are, then we vote on it, and we get to our final call on the question we want to go through. You can do voting like that. You can pass out cards. You can just have discussion to say, what are y'all's favorites? You can see examples like you see on the screen here. Do we put like Post-its on a wall and see what everyone's feeling? Do we do walkabouts? So there's lots of ways to determine the questions you want to focus in on. You can do it formally, informally, discussing, polling, you name it. Voting, I've done, again, those little cards where you kind of put stickers. Oh, I've seen that before. So a chart of all 12 and you put red stickers and yellow stickers and things like that. Any mechanism to help to get your larger group of people to get, on some kind of, what's the word? It's not compromise, but to be able to come to a conclusion together as a team on what you want to make your actions and priorities for that year. Right? So that's a good, thing to think about, is how you're going to do that. And then in that discussion that you have within, you're going to talk about the specific actions, right? So we prioritize. Now we want to talk about specific actions we're going to take. So not just the questions, but what are the actions we're going to take now to try to build it? And you want it to be enough to drive the engagement, but not to overwhelm your team. A lot of advice I've given people over the years is to say, look at what you're already doing and see how you can integrate action planning into it. An example, I'm already doing team meetings once every 2 weeks. I'm just making up stuff, right? I'm going to start integrating into that team meeting discussions about, everyone's feelings about knowing their expectations at work, right? We'll make that an agenda item. We'll talk about, are we all clear on each other's expectations for each other or something like that? Now what I'm doing is taking something I'm already doing and I'm integrating engagement into that plan. See? So that could be something simple, oftentimes has the highest impact. So look at those specific action items that you can do. Can it be something that's easily done, but not overwhelming, but still challenges us? Again, be specific about the areas need improvement. Focus on the things we can control. You're going to have, I'm not going to lie to you as supervisors, you're going to have people that talk about it all being about compensation or something else that you're like, well, I'm limited here. So you really try to direct the conversation and what are the things within our power and our scope to try to help to improve engagement, knowing that and recognizing that the same discussions you have with your team you would be having with your roll up, and they would be having with their roll up, right? So themes hopefully are getting across, but the best response we've seen over time is at the lowest level discussion. So again, when I worked with groups and then we would say, let's do this division wide, that is good, but I'd always say do that and, okay, don't just do that, because the best bang for your buck comes from those individual level discussions about those needs. Does that make sense? Okay, beautiful. Okay, so here's an example. This is without using the system for action plan that I showed you before, but what types of things could potentially be a plan? There's no rule on what it has to be, but let's say maybe we are trying to focus on the best friend at work question. And you can see where we're at right now. And our goal to really look at the Q10 is that we want to improve our social networking opportunities. Okay, that's the point of why we're focusing on question 10 based on all our discussions. So then as a group, we talk about, well, what are some ways we can do that? Maybe we make a more intentional focus on celebrating things like birthdays and anniversaries. We do a monthly virtual coffee break. Every 6 months, we have a happy hour, right? And then we talk about also who's charged, who's leading. There's not a plan that you're going to make as a supervisor that is devoid of others. You don't want it to be just the supervisor leading it. Now, the supervisor has to have the buy-in, but everyone should be involved in the plan. Does that make sense? So how are we all going to contribute? Who's going to do what? How are we going to check in? Well, we decide we'll meet once a quarter to talk about it. We'll do an internal survey to see what feelings are about it. We're going to revisit the scores next time around and see where we're at and what we want to do next. Right. And one cool thing too about when you put an action plan in the system, it's also not set in stone, so you can always make adjustments, which I love. So maybe you need to refocus based on some things you're doing or tasks you're doing. You can go in there and edit. So that's good news too. It's not locked in. Okay, so this is where I want you to pull out that Q12 question list. We're going to do a quick breakout activity. I'm hoping, yeah, if y'all all are good boys and girls and we do this, we might get out a little early today. So, but you got to play along in this breakout group. Okay, so take that handout I sent you earlier. Okay, it's going to have all of the Q12 questions. I want y'all just to play along, like maybe that group that you go into in the breakout session is your team. Okay, and let's just discuss, like, take a question that y'all think you should focus on, kind of talk about why, and then think about what's an action step or two that we can take to help us to build upon engagement in that question. This also might be nice because when we come back together, this might give us some ideas on things we can actually do with our teams too. So get together and try to play this out. Like, what question would you focus on? Maybe what's some steps you could take? What do we think? How would we define success? Because these kinds of ways y'all have the conversation with each other would be similar to what you would do with your teams. That makes sense? Beautiful. Okay. I'll know if you drop out, so don't you dare. I'm going to pause the recording. Okay, everyone, welcome back. How did the discussions all go in your breakout rooms? Anyone want to share some examples?
So in group one, we really looked at engagement and the idea that there may not be a strong employee engagement with the results of the Gallup poll. Mm-hmm. Because it seems like such a broad topic, I thought the best course of action to start with is opening a dialogue with the team. Mm-hmm. And we brought up some interesting points, such as trying to get, of course, some more details about how it is they feel disengaged, but also create opportunities to understand better how they would want to be engaged, what their methods of communication, what their methods of feeling appreciated are, mm-hmm. so that we can try to channel that and specialize that to the employees themselves. And then based upon that feedback, creating some sort of continual communication, let it be going and getting coffee together, or mm-hmm. having just frank conversations, or creating opportunities to be engaged as a group or engaged as an individual with leader and team. And then finally, based upon the results being that engagement is lacking, I would encourage training, because the most important thing in this is a dialogue, and therefore it's based upon communication. So I say that both the leader and the employee has a 50-50 role in that. And through training in both areas, that would allow the growth to occur. And I think that would have great results.
Thank you. Okay. Another team. Tell me your perspective or take, or if you picked any individual questions.
I guess I'll go. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Okay,
Sorry.
good. Just making sure. No, I'm sorry.
Mhm.
Our group picked the second question that says, I have the materials and equipment I need to do my work right. We picked that one because for my department, that was one of our lowest questions. And so we thought about, the first thing you need to ask is, what do you need?
Yeah.
And then we took a step back and realized maybe some of these people who have needs and wants aren't comfortable, or they're shy, like myself,
Mm-hmm.
and they're not going to say what they want in a group setting,
Mm-hmm.
or in someone else's space. So the first thing we figured we would do is try to create the environment where somebody feels comfortable enough to share their needs and wants. And then from there, we went into talking about being transparent with the funds that we have available for these needs and wants. Do you need coffee? Or do you need a $10,000 computer?
Right. Right.
What, because there's a difference.
Mm-hmm.
And then continuing to encourage the conversation about what is needed. Is it just specifically for one or two people, or is it something for the entire department? And then go from there.
Good. Perfect. Awesome. Thank you. Okay. Someone else?
So our group discussed the question 1. I know what is expected of me at work. Just because my group is too small, I don't get an individual report for my my people. So I was looking at like our department as a whole, and I was rather shocked to see how low that was. That it seems the majority of our department doesn't know what's expected of them, and so that was shocking and alarming at the same time. And so we kind of discussed, how do you discuss that with your group, and what type of things could you do to make those expectations more clear? And obviously that would look different from department to department, because my team is fully remote, and that might be, and I can't help but wonder if that's maybe an aspect that goes into that, kind of taking you out of the office kind of changes things a little bit. And so we talked about just, how do you approach that and have that conversation with your team, and obviously make those expectations clear, because that's obviously going to make you more successful and more efficient if everybody's on the same page and knows what's expected of them. So that's what we kind of discussed.
Perfect. Yes. Great. Good. See, and I love the inferences you're already making, and like some of the things that are surprising and the ideas that you had. And that's good, because that's the start, right? That's how you prepare. And then when you go in the meeting, you've got like this kind of background in your head, and then that helps to maybe guide some of your initial questions. And then based on the responses you get back, it may move you in the same area you're thinking or a different one, but it gives you that starting point. And that's why it's good to have the survey. I know I keep emphasizing how important the conversation is, but the survey again is a helpful tool and a mechanism to get you going, right? And to help to kind of see these connections you may not have seen otherwise, or ask the questions we may not have asked otherwise. I mean, the truth at the end of the day, even without this survey, these are a list of important things that supervisors should be mindful of and be talking about. Recognition, development. These are things y'all already know are important. It's a mechanism to really help to drive progress in a strategic way. Good. Thank you so much. Okay, give me maybe one or two more people. The faster we do this, the faster we move on.
Yeah, we did question 8. In this, it made sense to me. It made sense to us at the time. So tell us if it doesn't.
Sure.
But the mission or purpose of my company makes me feel my job is important. A while back, the program I work with, we had either an outdated mission statement, or we didn't have one. So we all collectively got together as a group and created one within like it took 3 to 6 months, but we started out with a really large paragraph and just kind of started to bring it down and down and down, having everybody's perspective and just working as a team to develop that. So yeah, that's what we did. Yeah, through like several meetings to to get it down, which it took, because it's you're going from a whole paragraph to two sentences. So it was helpful, and it made us all feel to realize as we were working through it and talking through it and to speak about what we do and then visualize what we do. I think it kind of made a whole lot of people realize that what we do is indeed important. So.
Good. And help to build that connection. That's a great example. Yeah, perfect. Love it. And I like that it was a real example of what y'all tried even before having the results. But it's definitely what I would do is I would take and look at that and say, okay, oh, is there a dip or is there a change? What are actions we can take to help people feel connected to that mission? That's a great example. Do we have one of our own to help support what's going on at UNT? Have we talked about how we directly impact the students? All of these things are ideas and actions to help us to improve on that question. Okay, one more, and then we can move on. One more.
Yeah, I was in the group with Scott and Thomas, and we chose number 4. Have I received recognition in the last week, 7 days? And Scott mentioned that he has weekly check-ins just to see how everything is going and maybe commend someone for something they did that week. And then Thomas added, try to explain how that good job helped, and the specifics of what the problem was, and just to kind of give them a background and give them more purpose, and emphasize the importance of what they did.
Right. Good. Perfect.
Yeah. So, and then also Scott mentioned maybe have some sort of shout out board, so it's not just you that's, maybe someone helped them get something done and they can go on the board and, give gratitude.
Great.
So between the team.
Perfect. Love it. Great. All right. So hopefully this exercise helped y'all to maybe think of some new ideas, or at least ways to test your skills at having the conversations to get to what some good ideas would be. Yeah. And like I said, but when Crystal goes to reach out to you, Dr. O, and she sends you the survey information, she'll have in there a list of the upcoming action planning sessions too, and a link that you can go in to enroll. And so that way you'll, again, have that too if you want to try your skills more or learn a little bit more about it. But thank y'all very much for participating. This brings us to our last few steps. We're going to record. So after the team discussion, you enter the plan details into the portal like I showed you before. The same part where you could hit the button that says report. There's a drop down there that also says action. So report gets you to your report. Action takes you to setting up an action plan. So not only could you go to where I showed you the AI tells you the top and bottom and you can make a plan from there, you can also just do it by, instead of getting report, you hit action. Okay. This thicker document, this toolkit right there, this literally is like if you pulled up the system and you pulled this guy up, it point and clicks you through. Okay. So that's what I'm saying. I'm not going to do that right now, but this will point and click you through when it's actually time to go enter it in. And you're like, how was that supposed to go? So that's your point and click little resource. And so that's where you'll put in your new action plan in there each year. Some of the details to prepare yourself. See, what I would say is this is the stuff you want to talk in your team, or this is the stuff you want to make sure that your team talks about, because this is the stuff you're going to need to enter into the system. You're going to talk about any related items. So you'd pick your 1 to 2 questions. You would pick the topics, which is optional, but remember what that is it just gives you resources. So if it has to do with burnout in some way and you pick that, it's just going to give you a list of resources about burnout. It's not your actions. Your goal then is the primary purpose of why we're picking this. And then the description would be then the details of it, like what's your plan, when you can do it. That example I gave about them doing the milestones and the anniversaries and stuff, that's where all this information would go. And then your due date. And simple enough, you talk about those things after you had a discussion about what it means to them, what they'd like to see. You enter that in and you're done with your plan. I say you're done with your plan, but then you got to follow up. It's just like anything. You remember when we talked about performance management? It's an endless, like, whoop, throwing things around my office. It's an endless cycle, right? It always looks at, evaluates, and then makes plans based on what we just learned, right? It's a consistent little cycle. That's the same thing with engagement. It's a journey, right? And so every time we go through the cycle, we look and say, what was good? What happened last time? What do we know now? What should we do this time? It's a continuous process. So When you set it, remember, it's not set it and forget it. It's definitely a set it and continue to go back to it. Have we made steps like we want to? Whatever we put in, say we're going to do monthly check-ins. Where are we at? When are we going to go follow up in the system about where we are? You know, it's all of this stuff needs to get consistent, right? Tracking your progress, making sure people are staying focused as you're not just integrating it into how you do your daily work, but making sure you're coming back to it, right? A lot of times our institutions will do pulse surveys and everything in between the annual. That this is a great way just to continue to make it, you know, top of mind in discussion. Make sure you're reviewing it with your team, you're tracking the progress and communicating and celebrating the successes that happen from that action plan. That's going to be the most important. That also helps you with that question 4. Okay, so that really is the main discussion again about how all of this stuff helps us to be a better workforce, the best place to work, a place that really lives our values truly. I'll leave you with this quote. Great managers don't just tell employees what's expected of them and leave it at that. They frequently talk with employees about their responsibilities and progress, and to add a little bit more, how they feel about their work and their connection to the organization. Does anyone have any questions about anything we talked about today? I know it was, again, content heavy and we had a lot to do with looking in the system and all that. So I'm going to stop my share and just open up the floor. Are there any questions? This is our last session together. Yay. Are there any questions about anything we reviewed today in our session? Great. I will stop the recording.